One thing that really held me back when I was considering the Lumix S9 for my photography was that it didn't have any kind of a viewfinder. For a while I was shooting a lot of manual focus lenses, and I thought that it would be utterly impossible to manual focus lenses with a razor thin depth of field, like for example my Voigtlander Nocton 50mm f1.1 lens or my 50mm f1.4 Canon LTM lens, and that meant that I didn't really consider the S9 very seriously. Eventually I started shooting more autofocus lenses too on my S5 IIX. Then the S9 became much more of an option, especially for street photography, because there I really don't need a viewfinder all that much. But after I had my S9 in my hands, I wanted to try out whether it was actually possible to shoot manual focus lenses on this camera too, and to focus these kinds of lenses that are very fast. So in this video, I'm planning to prove myself wrong and prove once and for all that I can actually manual focus with this camera. So if you've been on the fence about buying the S9 because you think that you really need a viewfinder, then come along and see whether it's really such a big issue that the S9 doesn't have one. The funny thing is, I actually had to go out of the house twice for this, because I actually left my SD card at home. The Lumix has a warning, but since I hadn't set up any manual lens profiles yet, it didn't show me the warning until I had done that. I don't know how many years it's been since I've done that, but I was glad that I didn't plan to go far that day. After I finally had my SD card, I started off with some relatively easy to focus shots, and to be honest, in a woodland you really don't have to nail focus unless you get close to something. The cool thing about adapting M-mount lenses is that you can get a close focus adapter, which means that the sad rangefinder minimum focus distance isn't a problem anymore. That can also turn into more of an issue though if you don't have a viewfinder. After a few warm-up shots, I headed down into the forest, and there it's actually quite dark. It always surprises me how dark this place is. You can bet that focusing a dim rangefinder patch in a place like that is actually quite difficult too. So this photo shows that you can focus even these kinds of lenses with a screen. After a bit of trying around, I actually realized that it's harder to focus closer to infinity, because then focus peaking doesn't work accurately anymore, and it looks on the magnifier as if it's in focus, although it's not. So if you're using the magnifier, it's better to turn off focus peaking. At close range and mid distance, it's fairly easy to judge though. I don't think I missed focus on any of these shots, and that goes for video too. Of course, this lens isn't super sharp wide open, and with video motion you can move out of focus easily too, but it works quite well actually, even when you move closer with the close focus adapter. Hi guys, I've come out today with my new Lumix S9 and a Canon 50mm f1.4 LTM lens to get some manual focus experience with this camera, to see whether I can get critical focus without a viewfinder, and I think I'm actually doing quite alright. I think I got some really nice pictures already. And I'm also trying to perfect my Fuji 400H profile that I've been trying to set up on this camera. I'm not quite sure about the greens yet. They seem a little bit too cool perhaps. I'm still trying around with it. And this kind of tweaking is always necessary if you're trying to perfect a JPEG film simulation or something like that. I think I'm getting quite close now. The reds are okay in this. And now here in the forest I can perfect the greens. And I also just needed a little bit of nature, green, touch grass, that sort of thing. Because right now we have a lot of construction noise, and that really gets to me after a while. I needed some nature, basically. This is the closest forest there is around here. It's not really super big, and it's not really a proper forest. It's more of a mountain bike track, but I hardly ever see anyone on a mountain bike here, so it's perfectly safe to stand here, I think. Anyway, I think I'm gonna continue a little bit more and then head back, because I think I'm getting a little bit stung and eaten alive by mosquitoes. It's right around their feeding time, so I picked a great time to come out for these pictures. But I guess that's just how it is these days. To my surprise, I actually enjoyed composing with the screen, and the focusing wasn't too annoying either. Double tapping the screen brings up the magnifier, and the touch controls are responsive, so even on the Lumix S9 IIX, I change the focus point on the screen most of the time, because the joystick feels slow in comparison. A maneuver like that always involves this little dance of looking through the viewfinder, taking the camera away from the eye, repositioning the focus box, and then looking through the viewfinder again, double checking focus. On the S9 there is no such dance, and it's quite intuitive actually. The screen also invites more interesting angles, because composing from anywhere but eye level is a little annoying with a viewfinder, especially if you're looking up a lot. I get a stiff neck if I shoot a lot of pictures of the canopy with a viewfinder, and with the screen I could easily try different compositions that would have been awkward with a viewfinder. Of course, I could shoot like that with the S9 IIX as well, but usually I don't, because my habit is to look through the viewfinder. I shot a Leica M6 for such a long time that I'm really used to it by now. Shooting on the S9 certainly is a very different workflow than using a film camera, that's for sure, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's good to shake up old habits and try something new every now and then. Okay, I better get back. It's dinner time, so I stayed a bit longer than I expected. It's probably also quite dark here for recording on the GoPro. And I've had a lot of fun with this. This lens is so nice with a close focus adapter, and I really like it. So that's probably why I stayed a bit longer than I expected. Now I better get back before the mosquitoes eat me entirely. So, because it's dinner time for them too. So talk to you later in the studio. was really surprised by how easy it was for me to get used to composing just with a screen. I mean, I've done this in the past with other cameras. For example, I used to shoot an Olympus E-PL3 and that doesn't have a viewfinder either, although you can add an external one to that at least. But I didn't have one while I was shooting this camera most often, and I didn't really miss it all that much for quite a long while, except when I was in very bright conditions, and then it could be a problem. On the S9, the screen is much brighter and much better. And if you have issues with seeing the screen, then I would probably think that it's more of an eyesight issue than a brightness issue with the screen itself. I don't really have any trouble seeing the screen in sunlight, and that's really cool. Whether that's enough for manual focusing, I don't know though, because I actually went to a rather dark forest and there it wasn't really an issue to manual focus. The only issue that I ran into was that the focus peaking sometimes wasn't extremely accurate in such a chaotic scene as a forest. Especially if the subject was a little bit further away, it just didn't seem like it was in focus, even though it was, and sometimes it was showing me the focus peaking wrong and said it was in focus when it wasn't. But this was more of an issue if I was using the magnifier as well. This combination for some reason doesn't work so well, and I find that the focus peaking alone works better than the focus peaking combined with the magnifier. So now I have it set up that there is a button where I can just easily turn off the focus peaking so that it doesn't confuse me, and that pretty much solves the issue, I would say. Most of the time I didn't really have any problems, although in many cases I still double checked if the subject was a bit further away and it wasn't extremely clear whether I got it in focus or not. But with this workflow of double checking, I didn't have that many missed shots, and I thought it was working actually quite well, considering that I was just using a screen. Another issue that I found was that with manual focus lenses, the adapters can cause some issues. The focusing scale on the lens might be slightly off. I find that with my 35mm lenses, I actually have to focus at 3 meters instead of 2.5 meters to get accurate focus while I'm zone focusing on the street, at least with my close focus adapter. But that's more of an issue of not checking your focus on the screen, and not necessarily something that you run into if you actually take the time to focus properly and not just zone focus it in the right ballpark and then hope for the best. But of course this is also an issue on the S5 IIX, which has a viewfinder, and then it really doesn't matter so much, and it has nothing to do with the S9 as such. It's just a quirk of using manual focus lenses on an adapter. Of course, I conducted this test under quite ideal circumstances with a subject that wasn't moving all too much and in conditions that weren't super bright. So I can imagine that maybe in bright sunlight shooting street, manual focusing where I actually want to nail focus accurately would be quite difficult, and there I would probably still rely on zone focusing most of the time. But in those circumstances the focus peaking works a little better, I think, because you're not going to be tempted to use the magnifier and be slow and all these sorts of things. So I will try that out soon and see whether that works out too. In general, the viewfinder issue turned out to be much less of a problem than I thought, and I don't find myself missing it too much. Occasionally there will be 1 or 2 pictures that would require a viewfinder really for accurate composition, but with sensor sizes these days it really doesn't matter so much, because you can always crop a little and perfect it that way. I shoot a lot from the hip too, and in those circumstances you're not framing accurately anyway. It's just, you know, randomly point and shoot and see whether it works out, whether you got what you wanted in frame. And then you wouldn't be using a viewfinder anyway, because you don't even have an opportunity to put it to your eye. And I shoot a lot in that style, so for me the S9 is really perfect for those kinds of circumstances. For critical focus and so on, I don't really shoot the subject matter for it most of the time. The only downside I see with the screen is that it doesn't flip up it only flips out and then up, which sometimes means that the strap gets in the way, and that's a little bit annoying sometimes. I would much prefer it if it had one of these flip up and flip out screens, like on the S1 Mark II, and then it would be really perfect for me. The S5 IIX has the very same issue with the screen, so it's much more of a design issue with the way the screen handles rather than the quality of the screen, because the screen itself is pretty well visible, I think. So the most important reason why I didn't get on with this camera turned out to be not a problem at all, and I'm very happy about that because I get along with this camera just fine, and I thought I wouldn't for a very long time because I thought that I would be only shooting manual lenses. And even with those, it's not as much of an issue as I considered it to be. Really, judging a camera by the spec sheet and by the capabilities it does or doesn't have doesn't really tell you whether you actually need the specs that it has. Of course, I would still much prefer it if it did have a viewfinder, and I guess if I wanted it to be my ideal everyday carry camera, then it would have a viewfinder. In the same way as the L10 has a viewfinder that is off to one corner, like any rangefinder style camera. And I guess to make it the really perfect camera, it would have to have one of those flip up, flip out screens as on the S1 Mark II. Too many numbers. And that would make it really perfect. So all in all, I think the S9 was a great decision for me, and it's working out really well, even for purposes that I didn't think it would be suitable for, and for which I would more sensibly use the S5 IIX, really. But even in those situations, I can still manual focus with this camera too. And if, for example, I'm just traveling with one camera, I don't see why I would have to take the bigger camera just so that I have a viewfinder. Not really that necessary, and that's really good to know. If you shoot a lot of manual focus lenses though, and you have to make a decision between these two cameras, the S5 IIX or maybe another camera that has a viewfinder, and the S9, then I would maybe consider getting the one with the viewfinder, especially if you primarily shoot manual focus, because there are still some inaccuracies that crop in, and you have to be a bit more careful about double checking your pictures, and that makes shooting a little bit slower. And I find that shooting manual focus on these cameras is already slow compared to, for example, a Leica. Rangefinder cameras are really the gold standard for fast manual focusing, and with that it just cannot compete. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really helps out my channel and I would really appreciate it. A big shout out also to my Ko-fi supporters. You make all this possible and I'm really very grateful for it. If you also want to support what I do, then head over to Ko-fi, or maybe just watch another video. There's actually an entire photography playlist that you can watch here, and I hope I see you soon for another video. Bye!